Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. We are going to do the 14th episode of the summary of the Quran. Uh, Tonight we'll do surahs Al-Kahf and Maryam, 18th and 19th surahs of the Quran, respectively, and the 9th and the 10th surahs of the third group of surahs. What we find in these two surahs is that they are discussing the same themes as have been in the earlier surahs and are discussed in this group in general. Warning to the disbelievers, good news to the believers. The addressees are particularly the people of Quraysh, but when they are talked to, there is this reference to the children of Israel as well, the people of the book. We saw that in the last two surahs, Surah An-Nahl and Surah Bani Israel, there was this mention of the Jews. The other part of the big group called the people of the book, the other group is the Christians, the Nasara, who are in the background in these two surahs. So, not surprisingly, for instance, that we have one surah with the title Maryam. The stage of these two surahs is the stage of Itmam Hujjah, conclusive evidence established against the people who were being addressed by the Quran directly. We take Surah Al-Kahf first. In the first 5 verses, Surah Kahf, it begins with the description of the status of the Quran. And the Almighty says, Alhamdulillahi allazi anzala ala abdihi al-kitab walam yaj'al lahu iwaja. All expressions of praise and gratitude are reserved for the God who has sent down upon his servant the book and has not left in it any crookedness. Lam yaj'al lahu iwaja. It's straight and clear, to warn of severe punishment from him and to give good news to the believers who do righteous deeds. And it has come to warn those who say that he has a son, clearly referring to Nasara, the Christians. They have no knowledge of it, nor did their fathers had. What's coming out of their mouths is a serious matter. They are not saying anything except a lie. So, right from the beginning, the tone is set that the Almighty is addressing a group of people who have a religious perspective, but their religious understanding has gone seriously wrong. In verses 6 to 8, God Almighty is comforting the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, who would feel particularly disturbed and grieved on the fact that, on the one hand, he is delivering God's message to these people who were his own people, and the message is extremely serious, and the consequences of rejecting the message were very grim. And yet, on the other hand, people were not taking the message seriously. They were rejecting it, they were making fun of it, etc. So the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, the way he was, considerate, caring, extremely sensitive, he used to feel very disturbed. God Almighty says, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ أَلَّمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. O Prophet, you will probably kill yourself through grief over them if they don't believe in this message. The fact is, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا. We have made what is on the earth glamorous. Why? لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. so that we may test them as to which of them is best indeed. وَإِنَّا لَجَاعِلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَيِّدًا جُرُزًا. And we will certainly render what's upon it a barren ground. In other words, what the Almighty is telling the Prophet is that why do you worry about it? These people who are not paying heed to the message that you are delivering to them, it's not because there is anything lacking in the way you are delivering it. It's because of the fact that God has created this life so as to make it a test, a trial for all those who are going through its experience. And for it to be a trial, He's made sure that this life is attractive and glamorous. So when people do wrong, they do it because the evil deeds that they do brings them immediate joy, gratification, and they are tempted towards evil. They know what's wrong from what's right, and yet they go for the wrong ways because it attracts them immediately. While on the other hand, what you are asking them to believe in and follow is promising them rewards of a future life. So this is the problem with many people. They don't use their intellect, they're just after their base desires, and they're glorifying the value of this life. The attractiveness has made them obsessed with it. But they should know that this life is going to come to an end, and the world that they are so deeply in love with, the Almighty says, Inna laja'iluna alayha ma alayha juruza, sa'idan juruza, and we'll certainly render what's upon it a barren ground. It's all going to be flattened. It's going to come to nothing. Then we move on to verses 9 to 12. From verse 9 onwards is the story of the young men who took refuge in the cave, which story is often referred to as the story of the 7 sleepers. In verses 9 to 12, we find a summary of this story, followed by details in verses 13 to 26. That's the way the Quran expresses its message. The Quran has mentioned, we've seen it at the beginning of the 11th Surah Hud, Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu thumma fussilat. It's a book whose verses are summarized first and then they are explained in detail. Here is a very good example of it. The first few verses are a summary, and the same summary is then expanded into a detailed story. So that on the one hand, the basic theme, gist of it is there in the minds of the readers. It's intact. While on the other, the details are also explored so that they know what exactly happened and what were the different aspects of the story that need to be taken into consideration for drawing lessons for the future purposes. A few young men prayed to God, seeking His mercy and guidance, and retreated to the cave that they had decided to go to. They felt their faith was being threatened by their nation. God caused them to sleep for years and awakened them to make them a sign for all others to draw lessons from. He says from verses 21 and 22, وَكَذَلِكَ أَثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ لِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا. Thus we arranged for people to be informed about them so that they know that God's promise is true and that there is no doubt about the arrival of the judgment day. That is, when people came to learn about the fact and they knew it with complete authority, there was no doubt about the veracity, truthfulness of the story, that there were a few young men who, because of the difficulties that they were facing in following their faith in an environment that had gone completely corrupt, they had to leave that environment, and they slept in a cave along with their dog. They slept for a very long time. And in the meanwhile, the generation that had caused them to feel uncomfortable because of their wrong attitude, that generation disappeared and gave way to another. And the new regime was favorably inclined towards the faith of these young men. And when people started looking for them, they found that despite the fact that a very long time had gone by, they were still alive. And they awoke from their sleep and thus became a sign for people to know that God's promise of the next life is true. That's what the problem is with many people who do not come close to religion. They do not take the life hereafter seriously. They don't want to believe that after this death there's going to be another life wherein they'll be held accountable for whatever wrongs, misdeeds they are committing. So God, through these young men, caused the concept of the life hereafter, the reality, the truthfulness of it, to emerge as something that would be undeniable for the people who saw the fact that these young men came back to life after they had disappeared for a very long time. So the Almighty mentions that He did it, لِيَعْلَمُوا, so that people should know, أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ, that God's promise is true, وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا, and that the day of reckoning, the time of reckoning, there is no doubt about it. It has to come, it must come. Verse 22 says, but instead of that, they started arguing later that there were three and their dog was the fourth one, or there were five and the dog was sixth one, or there were seven and the dog was the eighth one. In other words, instead of focusing their attention on the real subject at hand, that there is life after death, that people, even after they'll be dead, they'll be made to come back to life for the accountability and the next life to proceed. That was the subject matter, but they ignored it. Instead, they started talking about things which were insignificant. How many people were there? Were there three and the fourth was their dog? Or there were five and the sixth was the dog? Or there were seven or eight, the eighth was the dog? This is irrelevant. It doesn't carry any significance. And that's what happens, unfortunately, that even when the Almighty shows the spectacle of some of His signs, instead of paying heed to His signs, people focus their attention on what is less relevant or irrelevant. And that's why it's very important that we should focus on the correct questions. The right questions need to be asked, questions that carry relevance, that are important, because human mind can go anywhere. So if we do not focus our attention to know what the truth is, we do not take the questions that are important seriously, then God causes our mind to go astray and search for answers to questions which hardly matter. I mean, how does it matter whether the sleepers were seven and their dog was eight, or whether the sleepers were five and their dog was six? The important thing is that whole story is enabling us to know that God is fully capable of ensuring that people, after they will be dead, will come back to life. Thereafter, the Almighty mentions the story of two individuals uh, to help understand what the reality of this life is. He says, and وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا رَجُلَيْنِ, present to them an example of two men. We gave to one of them two gardens. They had grapevines, palm trees, and crops. But he was arrogant. Verse 39 tells us, the other person said to him, why did you not enter your garden saying, MashaAllah, I've got it, what God willed. La quwwata illa billah. Without God's help, no one has any power. He said, if you saw me less than you, lesser in wealth and progeny, why did you not say that? Why did you not acknowledge that all that I've got is from God? So it doesn't matter if you have less, it's all God's will. In verse 43 then, the story goes on to tell that thereafter his gardens were struck by a calamity and they were destroyed. وَلَمْ تَكُنْ فِيَةٌ يَنْصُرُونَهُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ وَمَا كَانَ مُنْتَصِرًا. And there was for him no group that came to his help, nor could he save himself from the disaster. That is, this was something that should cause all others to learn a lesson from. That if you have certain resources, blessings of the Almighty, aplenty, more than others, it should not be the cause for the individual to be arrogant and to look down upon others as inferiors. If anything, it should be a reason for the individual to be thankful, grateful to the Almighty, because this life is only a trial. If there are people who are privileged, they are going through a trial of gratefulness. If there are people who are deprived, they are going through a trial of patience. Trial it is in both cases. But if people who have been privileged by the Almighty with His blessings, they, instead of being thankful to the Almighty and being humble as a consequence, so that they share some part of their blessings with others, instead of that, if they start boasting of what they have and start telling those who are lesser than them that they are more privileged, then that would mean disaster for them, because that's exactly what the Almighty doesn't like. And then he goes on to explain in verses 45 and 46, وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, and present to them the example of the worldly life. It's like rain that we send down from the sky, and the vegetation of the earth gets thick and later becomes dry stubble blown away by winds. That's what this worldly life is. And in one stage, it looks brilliant. In a later stage, it's all gone. We all have to leave this world. Al-malu wal-banun, zinatul hayat ad-dunya. Wealth and children are the glamour of this worldly life. But the truth is that it is your good deeds that are better for you for looking forward to in the eyes of God. And they are better for imagining and looking forward to for the purpose of reward. So that's what one's way of looking at this worldly life should be. Instead of taking pride in what we have and looking down upon others, this life should be taken as a test and a trial right from the beginning till the very end, because whatever else is there is just zinatul hayat dunya. It's just a glamour of this worldly life. It's meant to be a trial and no more. Then we move on to a very important theme of Surah Al-Kahf, which is the story of Moses, Musa alayhi salam, and a servant of God who is often referred to as Khizr. There are a number of opinions about him, but the most reliable one says, according to it, he was God's angel. This story tells us that Khizr and Moses, they embark upon a journey, and the two have an understanding that Musa alayhi salam, Moses, is going to behave like a student, and he'll observe what Khizr would do, but he won't ask any questions. He would not protest at what he would be doing. So Moses was the representative of human beings, and Khizr was doing what God would ask him to do, he being an angel. So that deal was struck. They would go through this journey. It would be an experience of learning for Musa, but Musa is not going to protest at what he would see happening in front of him. So what happens is that Khizr damages a boat of poor fishermen, and then at a later part of this journey, he kills a young boy for no reason. And then he erects a falling wall of some uncultured people, but he doesn't ask them to give reward. All these decisions baffled Moses. Khizr, the angel, explains in the end, because each time a strange incident took place, Musa alayhi salam, he asked him, why did you do it? I mean, this doesn't make sense. And he would remind him that, didn't I ask you not to ask questions? And didn't I tell you that you will not be able to remain patient? So finally, when the third incident took place, and Musa could not keep himself from asking him, why is it that you are doing it? Khizr, the angel, said that, look here, Haza firaqu baini wa bainik. Now is the time that we have to depart. We cannot continue with this journey anymore. But let me tell you what happened. The boat was made defective to save it from being seized by a king. The boy was killed to save his pious parents from his subsequent misconduct. And the wall was erected to enable two young boys to extract their wealth later, while their father earlier on had buried the wealth and treasure for them. So that's why I did what I did. And all I did, Khizr said, was because the Almighty asked me to do it. Now the story is teaching a lesson to all of us. The lesson is that in this life, whatever happens is by the will of God. And we have to remain patiently steadfast. We should continue to worship the Almighty, thank Him, serve Him, submit to Him. It's because we do not know the entire truth about what's happening in this life. At times, we are amazed, baffled, grieved at what's happening. They don't understand, and people protest. So, the Almighty, through this story, is teaching us that there are reasons why things happen the way they happen. And if those reasons which are hidden, not known to us, if they are made available to us and unfolded, then we would know that whatever God does, He does for a good reason. And therefore, there is no reason why we should protest at what's happening. Obviously, we must try as best as we can to make things better for us. Whatever is within our means has to be employed for improving our life, our environment, our conditions. However, we have our limitations. We are not running the affairs of this world. So there are many things that happen in our life which we don't understand. And God is telling us that if you don't understand them, it shouldn't matter. We understand what we are doing. And whatever God does, there is a bigger picture, is a bigger plan for it. And therefore, humans would do well to remain patient, to remain steadfast, to remain thankful to the Almighty for whatever is happening, because this life, after all, is only one part of the bigger picture of life that God has in mind, and He would want us to lead this life believing in God that He is the best judge, He knows everything, He is kind and considerate, He is wise, He is fair, and therefore it is unthinkable that He would decide something to happen even though the happening of it would be bad, evil, or incorrect. No, God is wise and all His decisions are wise. It's another matter that in many cases we do not know fully immediately when an incident happens as to why it happened. So that's the great story. And at the end of it, Khizr told Moses, ذَلِكَ تَعْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. That's the reality of the incidents you couldn't endure with patience. So the idea is that we humans should be patient no matter what happens, because God is the best judge and we leave our matters in His hand, we trust Him. Then we move on to the last part of this surah, which is verses 103 and 104, when the Almighty is telling us, well, He's asking this question, Qul, say, Hal nunabbiukum bil akhsarina amala. Shouldn't I tell you about those who will fare the worst in the outcome of their deeds? Allazina dhalla sa'yuhum fil hayati dunya. They are the ones who wasted all their efforts for the worldly goals, worldly life. وَيَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسَنُونَ صُنْعًا, imagining what they were doing was great. Their deeds will go waste on the judgment day, and they shall carry no weight. So all those people who are deeply engrossed in this worldly life, and all that they are doing is for the benefit, for the future of this life alone, they are in for a great disappointment on the day of judgment. Because while they are thinking that what they're doing is great, they're actually doing something that will not be useful and beneficial for them at all. And they are the ones that the Almighty calls are the al-akhsarina amala. They are worst in the outcome of their deeds. So the message is that while living in this world and making our life good, comfortable, and successful, we should worry about the next life as well, because it's in the next life that the real value and outcome of our deeds are going to be unfolded. And if somebody is just investing all his energies on this life, the betterment of this life, then he is in for a real disappointment and shock. The next surah, which is partnering with Surah Al-Kahf, is Surah Maryam. This particular surah begins, like many other Quranic surahs, begin with the disjointed letters, huruf muqatta'at. These letters could be 1, 2, 3, we have seen them, 4. But perhaps this one is the longest of all these disjointed letters series, wherein we have Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Swad, 5 letters at the beginning of Surah Al-Kahf. I've already mentioned that these letters do carry meanings. At the moment, our research is insufficient, scant, and therefore we cannot decode what's mentioned in these letters. But as and when this knowledge is going to become more known and precise, we will know that these letters do carry meanings, and that those meanings are have a relationship with the rest of the surah and its message. I'm saying it because, at least in the case of one surah, Surah Al-Qalam or Noon, this truth is already known. And indirectly, in the case of a few surahs more as well. Zikru rahmati rabbika abdahu Zakariya. This is a mention of your Lord on his, of mercy of your Lord that he had on his servant Zakariya. His wife, he prayed that he has grown old and his wife is barren too. And he's worried about his inheritance. Obviously, after old age, it's departure from this life. But he cannot see anyone who is going to take over the responsibility of the rich, spiritual, intellectual heritage that he's going to leave behind. So he also says to the Almighty in his prayer what is moving. You know, if one is able to say such things in prayers, I'm sure that it would make the prayer far more effective. He said, he has never been disappointed after praying to you, O God. So, when God is asked to do something with the confidence that he is going to certainly respond, God does indeed respond. So, from verse 12 onwards, we learn God gives the good news of Yahya to Zakaria, good news of a son. Ya Yahya khuzil kitaba biquwa. O John, Yahya, hold fast to the book. This is the same John who is known as John the Baptist. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ الصَّبِيًّا, and we gave the ability to judge, that is, to decide matters right from wrong at a young age. وَحَنَانًا مِنْ لَدُنَّا وَزَكَاةً, and affectionate piety and purity. Wakana taqiya, and he was God conscious. So the Almighty is praising this son that he has given to Zakaria. He was neither aggressive against nor disobedient to his parents. Extremely pious young man. No wonder he was chosen by the Almighty to be his prophet. Verses 29 onwards, we find that the Almighty is talking about the mother of Jesus, Mary. Vazkur fil kitabi Maryam, and mention in the book the account of Mary. This description tells us that she conceived a baby in her womb miraculously while being a virgin. When Jesus was born to her and people raised questions and objections on the birth of a child without a father, the Quran tells us, فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ, she pointed to him. That is the baby that was there in her lap. They asked, how can we speak to a child in the cradle? I mean, we want to ask you why, how come you've come up with this baby and you are pointing to this child? Qala inni Abdullah. The child said, I am God's servant. That is, in order to absolve Mary from the blame which people around her were hurling at her, the Almighty arranged for a miraculous outcome, solution to the problem, and that was that the child who was thus born miraculously was made to speak in the cradle. And he said, Inni Abdullah, I am the servant of God. Atani al Kitab, and he has given me the book, Waja'alani Nabiya, and he has made me a prophet. And he's blessed me wherever I go, and he has enjoined upon me to say prayers regularly and to pay zakat as long as I live. This story of Mary and Jesus is mentioned after the mention of the story of Zachariah and John. John and Jesus were contemporaries. John came a little before Jesus, and Zachariah was the husband of Mary's aunt. So they were relatives, and they were cousins, Jesus and John. The reason why it has been mentioned in this way is that the Almighty wants the Christians to understand and realize that if Jesus was born miraculously, there's nothing surprising about it. It doesn't really mean that this miraculous event should be made a reason for Jesus to be considered the Son of God. If Jesus was born miraculously, so was John the Baptist. Why do you not consider him similarly God's son? Because that too was also a miraculous birth. So the idea that's given is that all these happenings are at the behest of the Almighty. He is the one who takes these decisions, and one should not go beyond limits and exaggerate the status of anyone. John, Jesus were great prophets of God. They served God, they were God conscious, they preached what the truth was, and therefore they should be held in high esteem at that level, the level of them being the servants of God. So, if Jesus was born miraculously, that should also not come as a surprise. God does what He wills, and there's nothing beyond the reach of possibility of the Almighty. After mentioning stories of many other prophets in Surah Maryam, the Almighty says in verse 58, إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُ الرَّحْمَنِ. When the merciful God's verses were recited to them, to each one of them, خَرُّوا سُجَّدًا وَبُكِيًّا, they fell in prostration, weeping. That is, these people, the great prophets, messengers of God, they were all true servants of Him, humble, strongly attached to Him. And whenever they would find that the Almighty's message is approaching them, they would submit to it. They never claimed divinity. They never asked their followers to raise their status to a level wherein they become partners with God. This is a blunder that has been committed by some followers of some prophets. God had sent all these great humans to guide humanity towards the right path. And one very important part, feature, pillar of the right path is the most important is that God is only one. He is the one who is the creator and the sustainer, one and the only. He has no son, no father, no partner. And therefore, he should be worshipped as he presents himself. There's one God who listens to our prayers, and everything else is his creation, and all others are his servants. May the Almighty enable us to understand his message properly, and may he enable us to proclaim it, let others know about it intelligently, and also enable us to follow it to the best of our abilities.